Вітаю вас на парламентському телеканалі Рада. Це проект «Власний погляд». Наступного тижня Організація Об'єднаних Націй та всі члени по всьому світу розпочнуть роботу відлік 1000 днів до кінця 2015 року, тобто до кінцевої дати досягнення цілей розвитку тисячоліття. Саме про це і будемо говорити з нашою гостею студії Рікардою Рігер, виконуючим обов'язків постійного представника ООН в Україні. Вітаю вас, пані Рікардо. Дуже дякую вам, що прийшли до нас.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Насправді, хочеться, щоб ви пояснили, що таке цілі розвитку тисячоліття, що тут найголовніше.
What is Millennium Development Goals and what is the most important among them?
Around the year 2000, all countries of the world agreed on certain goals which would improve the lives of people. They decided to have poverty, they decided to reduce maternal mortality, to reduce child mortality, and to protect the environment. There were a total of 8 goals, which each country adapted. We now have a situation whereby some of the goals are just within reach. It is possible to reach them, and there are a few others where extra effort is needed to reach them. And therefore, the Secretary General of the United Nations has called on these last 1,000 days by which we will reach 2015, and where we hope to reach as many of the goals as we can. This is particularly important also for Ukraine because poverty has been halved, that is true. Education, that the total number of children who go to school for a long period of time, is also good. But there's still 2 or 3 areas where we believe that extra effort is needed by the government of Ukraine, by civil society and private sector to actually help to reach those goals also in Ukraine.
От за ці 13-15 років, наскільки Україна пішла вперед, наскільки вона була прогресивною у своїх діях?
What was the pace of Ukraine? What kind of progress has it achieved?
Ukraine has made significant progress when it comes to poverty eradication, but there still are pockets of poverty where you see inequality rising between the urban situation and the rural situation. Ukraine has also made progress when it comes to maternal mortality reduction and child mortality reduction. As well, it features very well when it comes to educational attainments. But where Ukraine hasn't reached the targets yet, and it is difficult to reach them by 2015, therefore the additional efforts are needed, are in the areas of gender equality. There still is a significant gap in pay for the same job that men and women do. There also is an issue with representation of women in parliament, for example, and in decision-making bodies. There is an issue with regard to environment. Ukraine is not reaching its targets on environment in terms of energy efficiency, reduction of CO2 emissions, or protected areas. So extra effort needs to be done on those issues. And one very important issue where Ukraine is lagging has to do with HIV and TB. There are, unfortunately, still a lot of people in Ukraine who do not know that they are HIV positive and who then transmit the disease unknowingly to their loved ones. And a lot can be done through successful prevention programs where we hope that the government of Ukraine will actually take the action in collaboration with the civil society organizations to help prevent the transmission, either from husband to wife or from mother to child, and also then to treat the people who have the disease, because it is possible to live successful lives for 20, 30 years if you have the right treatment. And we see that there is about half of the people who need the treatment who don't have access to it, who can't get it because it's also too expensive, or maybe even because they don't know that they are sick.
Але люди сприймають позитивно ось таку підтримку, можливо, навіть потребу перевірятися, потребу йти вперед, потребу доглядати за собою і за родиною. Наскільки це прийнятливо?
Do really people accept that approach?
Саме в Україні.
Here in Ukraine.
Stigma is a very big problem when it comes to being a minority, be it HIV, be it a refugee, be it a migrant. And There are a lot of NGOs which are doing a lot of work. There are also very successful teachers who in school are able to teach tolerance. And it is important to know the facts. For example, on HIV, if you know that it is possible to hug somebody who is HIV positive, it is even possible to kiss someone and not catch the disease, then you realize, oh, my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law is sick. Why haven't I shown that I care for them for a long time? I will now go and hug them. And those are things where education is very important, where people realize that, and where discussion is important, and that it is actually put on the table so that one realizes that caring is important and caring can be done without harming oneself.
Взагалі, які ще проблеми варто подолати українцям, аби швидше здійснити ось ці цілі розвитку тисячоліття, аби наблизитись до здійснення їх?
The main three goals which Ukraine has to work a little bit harder on to reach them and to say, okay, we have reached the goals that were set globally 15 years ago, are indeed the three that I mentioned. Gender equality, HIV/AIDS, and environmental issues. Those are the three main issues out of the 8 which Ukraine needs to work on more. The other ones Ukraine is pretty good at. One issue which I would like to raise, though, also is the issue of education. Education in Ukraine covers a lot of people for many years. That is fantastic. It is much better than in many other countries. But the quality of education we see is now no longer addressing the demands of the labor market. What we now need are people who are creative, people who are encouraged to discuss, people who are ready with the latest technologies, and therefore will be able to compete globally with many other countries. And there I think something needs to happen too.
Але все-таки це можна виховати от завдяки співпраці взагалі з країнами ООН, ось цей креатив, так би мовити, ось це прагнення творче пошуків якихось.
It has something to do with how children are taught by their parents as well as in school. It has something to do with recognizing differences. It has something to do with encouraging children to question and no longer to be told, but I've told you so, this is it, and this is a fact. I know it amongst myself. I mean, I was also taught in a long time ago very much a top-down approach. This is the fact, here is a vessel, this is a child, we put knowledge in, and at some point they'll be ready. And that was what would happen to me. I wasn't encouraged in some parts of my life to question the teacher when I then asked, but teacher, can't it be done differently? I would like to add 2 + 3 as 3 + 2 or something like that. I wasn't encouraged, but I see that now happening to my children where they are being encouraged to think about why are the bees flying east or something like that. And that I think needs to go through the entire education system. And in order to do that, one also needs to encourage the teachers and give them freedom to teach in a way. And one needs a partnership with the private sector, because ultimately they're the employers. And they need to be able to work with schools and education systems to say, okay, in future we will need these type of skills. The soft skills, the questioning, but also the knowledge skills. And that, I think, that partnership can be strengthened a bit more.
А взагалі ось ця основа для розвитку людини закладається в школі завдяки освіті чи все-таки в самій родині? І що важливіше?
I think both are extremely important. Children are very adaptable. They know how to behave in one scenario, be it the family, and they know how to behave in a school scenario. But I think it is very important to make sure that both work hand in hand and that parents are involved in the education of their children, that they also have a dialogue with teachers, as well as that the teachers accept that the parents may have different ideas of what needs to be taught. And overall, I think both are extremely important.
От коли все-таки ці цілі розвитку тисячоліття за 2015 рік будуть здійснені, чи можна говорити, що Україна також разом з усіма країнами піде далі? І які наступні будуть цілі все-таки?
The world has recognized that the Millennium Development Goals, for which the deadline is 2015, were a very good rallying point. It was extremely useful for one country to the other to review the goals, to say what they needed to do, to improve the living conditions of the people, and to ensure a future. I mean, that's the overall goal. It is very important, I think the world has recognized that we would need another set of goals. It is not quite clear yet whether that should be 2050 or 2030, and discussions are going on, whereby the global community agrees that these are worthwhile reaching. And what we do know from the Rio +20 conference, the Sustainable Development Conference, which took place last year, is that we need to bring together the economic aspects, which have to do with poverty eradication. We have to bring together the social aspects, which has to do with respect, tolerance, contributing as a community. And we need to bring the environmental aspects. What we see today is that the way how we are consuming goods and consuming the raw materials of earth, water, air, and all the minerals, etc., we are actually using more than the earth can give us. And that, of course, is a dangerous situation to be in. What we now need to do is to rethink how we can use the environmental resources in such a manner that we are not the last generation, but that actually our children and our grandchildren have a possibility to actually also use their potential and can live on earth.
Взагалі, така ініціатива, певно, має взагалі виховуватися з самого маличку зі школи, ще правильно? Ці програми мають бути на законодавчому рівні, фактично.
Absolutely. The government has a very important role to play. The government is not alone. There are civil society organizations and there are individuals who can also contribute. But the legal framework is extremely important to set the direction. And what we have learned also by reviewing the human development over the last 20 years globally, we have seen that when there are governments who set a long-term vision for a country and who invested in human capital through appropriate healthcare, through appropriate education, and who set a legal framework for the private sector to actively engage in the country, but to also have trade, those countries were able to actually do better than was anticipated over a 20-year horizon. We see countries like China, yeah, big, 1 billion people, but we also see countries like Rwanda in Africa, where you thought, well, okay, these
And where is Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine has improved in human development, but it didn't do as well as some of the other countries have done. And that has to do with the transition phase. So the last 20 years coincided with transition, but it also has a little bit to do with prioritization of investments in healthcare, education, and engaging in and having a long-term vision. And it is understandable that one has a transition phase where one looks at where are we going, but it also is important to now take that step and say, okay, this is where we want to go, and irrespective which government is there, this is the path that we will continue and where we will help our country to move up.
Взагалі, я розумію, що підтримка країн ООН дуже сильна, зокрема для України, але чи Україна робить все можливе, і що б ви, можливо, порадили би, куди докласти зусиль, все-таки в якій галузі?
What would you suggest? In which area Ukraine should concentrate its efforts?
Ukraine, I think, has great potential. A pretty well-educated workforce, a large internal market, But it does still have a number of issues where we see that the vision, the push is not there yet. There is a lot of stop and go, and what we do hope is that the relationship between government, civil society, and as I said, the individuals, is done in such a way that the decision making is taken at the level where it makes most sense. What we need to recognize is that in such a large country like Ukraine, taking decisions only at the central level is not always the most efficient way. Having the resources at the central level is not always the most efficient way. But one needs to empower the oblasts and the rayons to take certain decisions, to have certain incomes, so that they can actually provide the services that the people need. Take healthcare. It is important that the government sets the standards of healthcare services, that it ensures the payment of healthcare services, but that it also facilitates the interaction with civil society organizations that can provide either healthcare or other social services. And that is where we think that Ukraine can still do a bit more.
Але в будь-якому випадку Україна може взяти досвід інших країн, успішних країн, європейських, але все одно розвиток буде індивідуальний, чи не так?
Nevertheless, its development will have some individual features. Is not that true?
True. Every country is characterized by geography, is characterized by its climate, is characterized by the people who live there and the history that the people have. The United Nations, particularly the United Nations Development Programme, never comes to a country with a cookie-cutter approach. Never says, oh, it worked in Rwanda this way, so you have to do exactly the same way. You have to have the same government structures or civil societies. What we try to do is to show examples, facilitate a discussion between governmental representatives, civil society, private sector, to come up with a solution that works for each individual country. Because we don't believe that every country is the same, and that these solutions have to grow based on the history and based on the geographic positioning of each country.
Я думаю, що все-таки всі, хто нас дивився, взяв для себе щось корисне. Я думаю, що Україна все-таки завдяки всім членам ООН піде ще вперед, буде тягнутися до найкращих досягнень. Дякую вам за інтерв'ю. Дуже рада була познайомитися. Нагадаю, гостем студії була Рікарда Рігер, виконуюча обов'язків постійного представника ООН в Україні. Будьте з нами, далі ще цікавіше.